I like DNA tools, and one of the newest tools that has come out is from Ancestry, and it is their Parental Match Separator. Now, the idea behind this Parental Match Separator is to take your matches, compare them to each other, and separate them out into which ones are from parent one and which ones are from parent two. If you've already done some work in there as far as identifying which ones are paternal and maternal, then this tool is not necessarily going to be that helpful. But for those matches where maybe you haven't determined that, or if you're just getting started, maybe you are adopted and you actually don't know who your biological mother and father are, then this Parental Match Separator has the potential to help you get a jump start on your genealogy. So what I wanted to do today is I wanted to go through and see how well this works. Let me start looking on Ancestry in the website with our friend Phil Garnett. And if we go down and click on the View DNA Matches, we have the initial page here where your matches are by parent as opposed to just a list of all the matches or by location. Now, they do say this is in beta, and so you can expect changes and hopefully improvements over time. Here are matches by, and it says by paternal, and it might say parent one, maternal in that case, depending on which side it is on. And here is matches by my maternal, or it might say parent two, depending on what you have here. Actually, earlier today when I was looking at this did say parent one up here and parent two, and so there must be some little bug going on as they're doing this. Now, initially, as I'm looking at this, Phil Garnett, in case you didn't know, is me. I can just see these pictures and I can actually recognize who some of these people are. And from these pictures, I know, yes, these are all in the correct group, in that paternal group. I can also look at these last names that they pop up. And I recognize 3 of these last names right off the bat as being part of my paternal group. So this is looking good. Next is common communities. I've done some different reports on communities, and one of the communities that I belong to is the Utah Settlers. And actually, that lines up with my paternal group. And then as I go down, I can look at my maternal group and see the same thing. Again, from the pictures of these people that I know, yes, they are on my maternal side. From the names that are listed, I happen to recognize a few of them as being on my maternal tree. And if you've watched plenty of my videos, you know that some of my ancestry, my great-grandfather, was from Cornwall, England. And so the fact that it is popping up here on this group is a good sign that Ancestry has done a good job of separating these two out. Now, there are 2 other groups besides your 2 parent groups. There is the both sides, and these are people that match you on both sides. Now, depending on your ancestry, this may be a small number like in my case, or if you happen to have endogamy in your ancestry, this may end up being a really big number. In fact, a lot of or most of your matches may fall under the both sides in some cases. I happen to be fortunate in that not only are my parents not related, but even my 4 grandparents don't have really any overlap between them. It's not until you get back several generations before you actually see any kind of overlap in my family tree. And finally, the last group is the unassigned group. Now, when we're looking at the number of matches, just to give you an idea here, paternal, I got 17,000 matches on my paternal side. I got 8,000 on my maternal side, so only half as much, and only 3 matches on both sides, including one which is myself. And then on the unassigned, I have 1,700 matches. So about, a tenth of what my paternal matches are, maybe about a fifth of what my maternal matches are unassigned. So it's not by any means the majority, but it's still a significant amount of matches that Ancestry has not been able to assign. So next, going over to Phil's match list. And this is the second part on here. And you can see that there's actually a little bit of information added now with the new splitting that they have. And the reason why I'm using Phil is because I don't have a tree for Phil. I haven't attached him to any tree at all. And so this is sort of like what you would expect for somebody that's brand new getting on here and what they are seeing for the first time. In this case, one of the things is it identifies myself in other words, the other kid in here, as being related on both sides. And if you have siblings that have tested, then that's one of the people that you will see on both sides because you are related to them through both sides. Next, you see on here, I have a son, and the son is unassigned. Now, I'm not sure why the son is unassigned as opposed to both sides, other than the fact that half of his DNA is obviously coming from my wife, who I don't share DNA with. And so that might be one of the reasons why it's not meeting whatever threshold Ancestry has for assigning it to one or both sides in this case. So if you have children that have tested on here, they're probably going to be listed as unassigned is my assumption. Next, you have my father. Now, this is Ancestry identifying him as my father simply based on DNA. This is not from a tree. And so obviously he fits into the paternal side. And I think this is why it is saying paternal as opposed to parent one. Because it's already identified the father, it can put whatever parent grouping then as paternal in that case because they happen to match with my father as well. And my mother, you can see here, is the maternal side. Now, as I go down the list, you can see it has put these in maternal or paternal side all the way down the list. Now, there's going to be some that are unassigned. There's going to be some that are, well, some. There was like 3 that are both. We've already seen one of those that are both. So there's just a couple more that are both. But they're all going to be listed down underneath here. Now, like I said, this may be listed as parent 1 or parent 2 if you don't have your father or mother tested. So that gives us a brief overview of what the nomenclature and what there is there. Now the question I have with any of these tools is, does this actually do what it says it's going to do correctly? For instance, if I happen to find a bunch of my maternal cousins that I have identified listed as paternal cousins, then I would think that there's something hinky going on with the tool. On the other hand, if it is separating out these correctly, then this is going to be, I'm going to recommend this as a good tool. So let's go through a couple of different tests to see what there is. Now, the first thing to take a look at is I have my dad and 3 of his siblings in Ancestry that have access to their DNA. And so I can look at them in this case. Now, with all of these, they might have a tree, but they don't have their mother and father in Ancestry. So on the column there, G, R, S, and M, those represent my dad and his 3 siblings. So first off, in parent 1 and parent 2 is the number of matches that have been assigned to each one. And you can see that this varies from a high of 36,000 all the way down to a low of 23,000. Now, what I find most interesting among this, though, is how different the most is. M down here has about 68,000 matches that are listed, whereas R only has about 48,000. So almost a third difference between R and M. I mean, that's a big difference in the number of matches. The next thing then is how many fit into both. Now remember, these are all siblings, so you would expect to see somewhat similar numbers all throughout. Now in this case though, the numbers are actually, from a magnitude standpoint, even greater than what the matches were, even though they're smaller numbers. In this case, we have a high of 69 that fall into both and a low of 7. So you have an order of magnitude, 10 times the number of boths for G that we have for S. And finally, we then have the unassigned. How many people fit into the unassigned category? And this ranges from about 5,300 down to 3,300. So again, a little bit of a disparity, but that is probably just because of the total number of matches that they have. If we look at the overall number of matches, that unassigned is roughly about the same percentage for all of them. But this both is one of the things that I thought that is the most interesting, in that there is a much wider disparity between these. So next, I picked 5 matches. Now, the reason why I picked these 5 matches to compare with all of them is because, one, I know exactly how they are related. When I say exactly how they are related, I have mapped out their segments to specific ancestors that they share. I've obviously searched their trees and found how they match up on the tree, and so I know exactly where they fit, but also with the segment data, I know how they match up. Now you may be wondering, how did I do that with Ancestry? And the answer is I didn't do that with Ancestry. All of these people happen to be on other platforms that do have access to a chromosome browser where I can match up those segments and see how they are related and where they fit in. So with that, for my dad and his 3 siblings, I've listed out what relationship Ancestry is showing for these. Now, it's important here to remember that whether you're parent 1 or parent 2 doesn't matter, because all that is a bin that they're being put in. It's not until that parent gets assigned as a paternal or maternal that you can say which group they are in. But you can see there's actually some difference between some of these. And in fact, this first one, MB, they have this same surname as my grandmother. Of course, that's exactly where they're related. But you'll notice for all 4 of them, it was unassigned. In other words, Ancestry can't figure out how MB is related to any of these people. With PP and JB, they were just unassigned to G. And then with JH, they were in the both category for G, but each one of the others was actually able to assign them to a parental group. So in a second, we'll talk about MB and JH and take a look at the data that Ancestry might be using to help us understand what is happening here. So first off, there was actually one person, LW, who wasn't assigned to parent 1 or parent 2, but was assigned to the paternal group for M. And that is correct in this case. And so what I did here is I changed up this and made blue the paternal and pink the other group, the parent 2 group. Now, because blue here is parent 1, what I can do is I can color all of LWs as parent 1. And so you can see that for G, parent 1 is the paternal group. For R, though, parent 2 was the paternal group. And for S, parent 1, again, is the paternal group. And because of that, then I can also color in which ones were the maternal groups with the pink. And we'll make this both a red just to stand out to us. So we have 20 different data points here. And in 13 of them, those are the ones that are labeled pink and blue, they are correct. They are identified as the correct parental group grouped together with others. So 13 out of 20 are correct. Now there are 6 that are unassigned, and so we really can't look at these. And then the final one is both. So really we have 13 out of 14 possibilities that are correct. And I'll spoil it right now, JH is not related on both sides of the family. Certainly not by DNA, because I've mapped out all of the DNA that is shared between them and know which ancestors. They all are on the maternal side. So let's go over to Ancestry again and take a look at these 2 matches. MB, which is unassigned, and JH, who had a both. So here we have the first match, MB, and MB is matching with G. G happens to be one of my aunts. And you can see here in the shared match list, it does say it is unassigned. In other words, it's not in parent group 1 or parent group 2. And as we look at the matches, we see first off, okay, we have sisters, brother, brother. Those are all both sides. That makes sense, and that's one of the things I told you before. We go to close family, and we have some both sides. Well, this is Phil, and this is myself. And then there's another cousin of ours that are all both sides. So there's, 7 of the both sides already accounted for, which is rather interesting because if you remember, when we looked at the chart of everybody, one of the siblings, S, just had 7 on both sides, which if we go back and look, happens to be the 4 of his siblings that are in there, plus me, Phil, and our cousin that were all related through both sides. So there was none of his other matches that were related through both sides. With R, there was only one other match that was related through both sides, but G and M happened to have some more even. And remember, these 4 people are all siblings. They all have the same 2 parents. Now, after we get past those cousins, you can see that we're starting to get into matches. And in this case, all of these matches are either parent 2 or unassigned. And actually the majority of them, large majority of them, are parent 2, which was confusing to me as to why this person was labeled as unassigned when we're looking at all of the shared matches, the majority of them are parent 2. So in this case, I don't have enough information about how Ancestry is doing their comparisons to determine which groups they go into. This is a case where maybe a chromosome browser might be better to see, do these people have really varying segments compared to some of the other siblings versus some of the other matches? Because remember, MB was unassigned for all 4 of these siblings. Even though when we look at the shared match list actually for all 4 siblings, there are no parent 1 that are listed in there. The majority of those shared matches are parent 2, yet it is still listed as unassigned. Now, this isn't a deal breaker for me. This is more of a confusion as to why this person is unassigned when just looking at it from a shared match standpoint, I would clearly put them into the parent 2 category. I'm not sure why Ancestry's algorithm is not doing that. So let's go over and let's look at the other match, JH, to see why they are listed as both for this person, GC. So next we are looking at JH, and going back to our table, this was the discrepancy that we want to focus on. JH for G was assigned as both, but I know that JH is only related through one line, and siblings of G, R, S, and M, all have JH on the maternal side. And this is, again, all identified by Ancestry through these algorithms. So I want to figure out why JH is listed as both for G when clearly JH is not related on both sides. So again, looking at the match list, the first ones are the siblings. They have both sides. And then there is me and Phil. We are also on both sides. And now we get into the rest of the matches. And you can see here, parent 2 side, parent 2, unassigned, parent 2, unassigned, parent 2, unassigned, parent 2, parent 2, parent 2, unassigned, parent 2, unassigned. And that is the pattern basically that it goes through all of these matches. There are parent 2s and then some unassigns. One thing I don't find is I don't find a parent 1 at all. None of these matches fall under a parent 1 that are shared between G and JH. So I'm left wondering, what is it in Ancestry's algorithm that is assigning this? And I would call this, in this case, an error, because none of the data that I'm seeing would indicate that there should be a question of this. I have 3 other siblings that all classify JH in the right spot. I'm looking at the shared match list, and the shared match list is only showing parent 2 or unassigned. It's not showing any parent 1. All the boths on the shared match list are also accounted for in these first little bit. So I'm left wondering what in the algorithm is doing this. And I'm going to chalk this up to an error right now, because while I don't have access to Ancestry's data from a segment standpoint, I have looked at all this segment data on other websites between JH and G, and I can map all of those segments to specific people on the maternal side. None of them are on the paternal side. Going back to our chart here, I would list this red as an error. Now you may be thinking, okay, well then how good is the tool? Well, overall then, the tool is still really good. In other words, it got 13 out of 14 right. And if you want to count the both as a half right, because it did put it in the maternal side, it just happened to put it in the paternal side also, then it really got 13 and a half out of 14 right, which is like 95% or so. Now, I did go looking at several of my other accounts, and they all followed somewhat similar as far as these results, except for one, and I want to show you that. DNA is my aunt's DNA. It's different from the other aunts. The other aunt that I was talking about the rest of this video was all on my paternal side. This aunt is on my maternal side. This is my mom's sister. And as I scroll down and look at this, I can see, okay, 9,800 matches on parent 1, 8,600 on parent 2. Interesting just because it is significantly less than what the other side of my family had. And that's one thing that I've found is this side of the family doesn't have near as many matches as the other side of the family. Now, looking at the names, they line up for the right group. This is actually going to be on my grandmother's side, and this is going to be on my grandfather's side. Now, the both side matches, there's 113 matches that fit into the both sides, which is interesting because there, again, is not really any overlap in families between my grandmother and grandfather. So I would not have expected this both sides to be so large. Also, on the unassigned, it is right in line with about what we saw with the others as far as the overall percentage. In general, this part of the tool looks good as far as numbers. I've got the majority of people assigned to parent 1 or parent 2. I have some both sides. I have some unassigns. Now, when I go to the match list, see if you can see the difference. So looking at my aunts, you can see first off her sisters, both sides exactly what we would expect and what we've seen with the others. But then when we get to the family, I see both sides, unassigned, 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 both sides, both sides, both sides, both sides, both sides, both sides, unassigned, unassigned, both sides, both sides, unassigned, both sides, both sides, both sides, unassigned, both sides, both sides, both sides, unassigned, both sides. Are you starting to get the picture here? Even though it had assigned 90% of the matches to either parent 1 or parent 2, a small minority of them to both sides, and then the rest to unassigned, I'm actually seeing throughout this, most of these matches are listed on both sides. Now, if you knew nothing about your family, you might be thinking, okay, this is endogamy. But in this case, I happen to know how this family relates, and in particular, how several of these people are related to my mom and her sister. And in this case, I can tell you that almost all of these both sides that I've looked at, there's no way they are both sides. They are clearly just on one side. I went over to my mom's then to take a look and see if hers was the same way. And no, it wasn't. It had delineated stuff as parent 1 and parent 2. And so many of these that on my aunts are listed on both sides, on my mom's are listed as parent 1 or parent 2. The other thing with this is because of all the both sides, I haven't added up everything because I haven't gone through all 20,000 matches. But it appears to me that there is significantly more both sides than what was listed on that front page. And so this to me sounds like it might just be a glitch. It might be something where the calculation in one place is right and they just haven't got it labeled correctly in some way. But I think this is the result of it still being a beta tool. There's probably some programming bugs that they have to work out. If you see something like this, where it's labeling everything as both sides or most everything as both sides, even though you know your family is not all related on both sides, this tool is not going to be useful for you right now. I would not worry about doing anything further with it until some of the beta gets updated and we can see whether bugs like this get ironed out. Now, I looked at probably 12, 13 different profiles in detail. This is the only one that had that. So you're again talking about 90 to 95% of people, you're not going to have this problem. But there's going to be, I think, some small percentage of people that you might see something buggy like this. So overall, if the tool is working correctly and you don't have the bug like my aunt had, where everything was both sides, then I think this is a really good tool that actually does separate out into each one of your parent groups. Now, if you have some data, for instance, your father or your mother who've tested, then it's going to label those as paternal or maternal. Otherwise, it's up to you then to determine which group is your maternal group and which group is your paternal group. Now, if you want to learn something more about DNA tools, then watch this video up above. And be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel.